Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, Joanne, do you want to say anything before I get started?
No.
All right, cool. All right. Welcome, friends, to session number 2. I will be the moderator. If you weren't here earlier, my name is Anna Madden Resnack. I'm a PhD student here at UT, all around crazed about grad school and academia. And so all of my session hopefully translates to good advice for you in your journey. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a developmental student. I listen to babies cry for science, and I really love it. I did my undergrad at LSU, had like a kind of average GPA, not very great. But I did a lot of research because I was just obsessed with how do we figure out the things. I did my master's at Texas State University, and then I came straight here to UT after that. I'm going to supply a little more of my story with some of these questions, but that's just my intro. And like I said, I'm really passionate about breaking down some of the informational barriers that people face when applying to grad school, and that's why I'm a part of this panel today. And I would just love to pass it on to Caitlin to introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce the rest of our panel and get started on some questions.
Alrighty, thanks. So my name is Caitlin Orsini. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at UT Austin, and I'm in the behavioral neuroscience area. So you've probably heard about the different areas in psychology. So I'm in the BN, or behavioral neuroscience area. To give you just a quick background, I did my undergraduate at a private liberal arts school in Maryland, Washington College, and then I went directly into graduate school. So I didn't take a year off. For those of you, I've seen questions, and I can speak to that at the in the discussion portion or whatever. And then I went and got my PhD in the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan in biopsychology. And then from there, I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Florida in the medical school. And I joined the faculty here in 2019. So I've moved around. I've done kind of the academic shuffle, if you will, and gotten a little taste of, private liberal arts school, R1 psychology program in a medical school. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be part of this panel, in addition to just, talking to future graduate students about science and academia, is that when I was an undergraduate thinking about applying to graduate school, I really enjoyed my college experience, but I didn't have a lot of direction as to how to apply to programs and what I should be doing. And I kind of had to figure it out myself. And although everything worked out very well and I'm very happy with my journey, I really like to be able to serve in that capacity to future students, so it's not as difficult. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'm going to pass it over to Josh, but I look forward to answering any questions that you guys have.
Hi, I'm Josh Holohan, and I'm in the clinical psychology area in our psych department. My area of research is health psychology, and there's a sort of two facets to that. One is I'm fascinated by stress, but not how stress makes us sick. Rather, to me, fascinating fact of life that despite the vast amount of stress that most, maybe all of us live with, much of the time, we manage most of the time to be healthy. And it's that process of stress resistance and coping that I'm interested in. And I have a second interest in health behaviors. Exercise is one, but lately, especially smoking and alcohol misuse. And did we say Nick was not here?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. That's fine. We'll keep it rolling. Okay, so I'm going to launch into some pre-submitted questions. And these are things that other panelists are welcome to chime in with. We kind of have like a sign, like who's going to answer what, but anyone can chime in on the panel on some of these questions. So the first one, which I'm very excited to answer, is how do I research PhD programs, and how many programs should I apply to? And do I need a master's degree to apply to them? Okay, before I even start answering this question, I am dropping a resource guide in the chat. So like I said earlier in this panel, I love paperwork. And so myself and some other grad students actually created this very approachable research guide that's broken down into what is a PhD in psychology? How does that compare to a PsyD? I want to get involved in research. How do I do that? And it has a timeline. I even have an organizational template that you can use to organize schools you want to apply to, email templates if you want to reach out to potential advisors. It's pretty beautiful. I'm very proud of it. But let's get back to these questions. How do I research PhD programs? So some of this information is in that guide. But honestly, Google. So some of the things I did as an undergrad is I went to conferences and I started writing down the names of the schools and the professors that I thought did really cool research. I also Googled best psychology PhD programs. And then I looked at their websites. If one, they have to have a good website. UT's is pretty beautiful. And you just start kind of scrolling around, seeing like, what are PI's research questions? PI being a principal investigator, that's also your advisor, also a professor. So what are their research questions? Could I do that? That sounds interesting. And so really it's just kind of like a nebulous of like collecting information from various sources. Also, if you have a professor you really like at your current or former university, say, hey, I think I'm kind of interested in this field. Do you know anyone who does that? Anyone who might be cool to work with? Really just try to time as much information as you can. How many programs should I apply to? So when I was finishing my undergrad degree, I applied to about 8 schools, like 7 PhDs and 1 master's program. And like I said, I had a couple years of research experience. I had an okay GPA, super average GRE score, and I still got into 3 PhD programs. But one of the best pieces of advice I can give is go where you feel comfortable. Go where you feel like you'll be challenged, but accepted and supported. And unfortunately, it didn't feel like a wonderful fit at those programs I got into at that time. So I wanted to keep building my resume. And so I decided to do a master's instead. Well, when I finished my master's, I applied to 1 PhD program, and that was UT. Because I had done my research and I was like, if I can't I work with Kaya DeBarbaro here. I was like, if I can't work with her, I don't want to work with anyone else. I'll go work in corporate or something, or I'll wait until she's here. But so it really kind of depends on your needs. If you're applying to a really competitive program like clinical, typically the average range of how many programs to apply to is like 10 to 15. That's also very expensive. So as part of that resource guide, we have a breakdown of how to apply for fee waivers. Also, like there's traveling costs and things like that. So we also have a breakdown of like how to budget that. And so how many programs you should apply to is really just, do you have a really specific area you'd like to study? Is there a person you'd like to work with? So that can vary how many people you apply to. And do you need a master's degree to apply to a PhD? Absolutely not. I decided to get my master's because I felt that there were some areas I could really grow in that would make me a more competitive applicant. And I felt like getting a master's would get me there. Master's degrees are typically unfunded. And so like I got kind of a cheap master's degree at $25,000 for 2 years, but it gave me enough experience to get my foot in the door to be noticed by UT, which was cool. And so you do not need a master's degree. In fact, there's only 2 members of my cohort who do have a master's degree coming into the program. Another half was like, they worked for several years as like lab managers or teachers or something like that. And the other half came straight from undergrad. So it really is a mixed bag, but yes, I think that's the answer to those questions. Anything else the panel wants to add about how many programs to apply to, things like that, before we move on to the next question?
I would just say, it's a balance. What the important things is, clearly you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket or 2 baskets or whatever, but make sure that the programs that you're applying to, there are maybe not 1, but several people that you're interested in working with, because although you may get into that program, that one person perhaps that year may not have the funding or the ability to take you on as a student. So not only are you diversifying the programs that you're applying to, but make sure that those programs, also there are several people there that you can work with. And that's not just like for primary mentors, but then you also can have informal mentors as well that will probably have an impact on you in your career for years to come. So that's another thing to think about.
Awesome. Josh, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add one distinction. I really liked Anna's answer about the master's. You definitely do not need a master's degree to get into a PhD program like ours, or really any research program. It can be beneficial if you would like to get a better sense of research or strengthen your record, but it doesn't really shorten your time in the PhD program. So it really is an added additional investment, and that's why it's not typical of most students. But I think a larger issue is, kind of a master's versus a PhD. For our program, we're a PhD program, many students don't even get a master's along the way to their PhD. For those of you interested in non-clinical aspects of psychology, developmental, social, behavioral neuroscience, everything that we've said speaks to you about research training, research focus, developing a research program. If you're interested in clinical, I think our focus on research is speaking to most of you, but I know from experience, not all of you. One of the problems at a research program like ours is we get lots of requests from students who want to be therapists or counselors. And the fact of life is, although, as Albin said, we train people to be both researchers and clinicians, our goal is to train researchers with clinical skills, not to train therapists. So a program like ours, or most PhD clinical programs, is a poor fit for somebody who's interested in being a therapist or a counselor. And in that case, what the master's is an alternative to the PhD. And if some of you have questions about, gee, might a master's be the right degree for me? When you post materials, Joanne, would you make sure that my email is on there? And I would be happy to answer questions for those of you who really might prefer the applied clinical track. And this session really is in fundamental ways not speaking to your interests, but I'll try to do that separately if you have those sorts of questions. But the bottom line is you would probably be looking for a master's in counseling or a master's in social work with a therapy focus. If it's the psychology route in a state like Texas, you would become a licensed professional counselor. But outside of that, what our program and other clinical PhD programs are about is research, 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 although you do get trained in clinical skills along the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation. Yeah, clinical is a whole other beast. I work in a lab with 2 clinical students. I'm in an interdisciplinary lab, and it's incredible the amount of work and impact they make through their research and training. And it's also, yeah, very important to make that distinction of like, if you want to be a practitioner or if you want to be a researcher. So definitely important things to consider. In fact, I keep plugging this guide, but this guide we have, we even have a page that's like good and not great reasons to go to grad school. And so we'll move on to some of the next questions. So the next question, and I think all the panelists can address this, is what is the best thing you can do to stand out in your application, and what does the application process look like after submitting? So I think the best thing you can do in your application, and this kind of ties into the idea of like good and not great reasons to go to grad school. If you want to go to grad school because you are not sure what else to do, that's not really great. You're underpaid for 5 years, and it's a struggle, and it's stressful, and it's really hard work. And so if you don't come in with at least some amount of passion or interest in doing that work, it's probably not going to be a good time. And so when you're crafting your application, what you want to do is you want to express, hey, I'm a person who's built some foundation of skills. I've taken the classes, I've done okay in them. I've done some research. I have some more questions I'm really interested in. And I want to get this PhD because I want to learn how to answer those questions better. And so when you are crafting your application, you really want to pull out some specific examples of like, okay, like, I had a research question in my undergraduate career, and these are the kind of experiences I went after to try to answer those questions. Something I mentioned earlier in earlier in this whole session is like, you don't need to be an expert to come in to be a PhD. You're going to your PhD to become an expert. And I think taking time in your application to express like, I'm a go-getter, I'm a person who has questions and wants to find answers. This is part of that journey, and I'd like to learn to answer those questions with you. Because typically you're applying to 2 or 3 professors or faculty at a university. Usually rank them in order on your application. So you typically want to mention those professors in your essay, saying like, I want to work with X professor because they study this, and that's part of my ongoing research questions. And what does the application look like after submitting? Torturous wait. Torturous wait. Typically you submit sometime between October and December, and then you're just refreshing your application page and try not to cry. Hopefully sometime in January or February, a faculty member will reach out to you and say, hey, they might say like, let's do a quick call, because they just want to see like, okay, like, can I vibe with this person? And then they might invite you to an interview weekend. And then after the interview weekend, they might either send you a formal offer or let you know that they don't have space or funding to take you on as a student. And so that process goes from like, you can start preparing your application like late summer, fall, and then you might get your answer late next spring. So again, about crafting your application, anything Caitlin or Josh you want to add to that?
I think you did a great job in explaining kind of what you should highlight. I think the biggest thing is not to make it feel forced. So do your due diligence in researching the program. You're going to be probably applying to a handful of programs. And so there's going to be a lot of, using similar documents across applications. So, but making sure that it comes across that it's easy to read between the lines. So make it really clear why this is the program for you. These are the people that you would want to work with. So, and again, sometimes it's pretty easy to see through these things. So I would just encourage you, and that just comes down to like doing the research ahead of time and selling yourself on the program as well. So it's just an elaboration on what was said previously.
And Anna, I'll try to work in a few tips across a few of the issues that most students are interested in. And I should say, Anna, when you said you're proud of your resource guide, it's terrific. So I really encourage folks who are here to take a look at the research guide that Anna put together. I think most of your questions are answered there. But here are a few tips. How to make yourself stand out. If we're talking about PhD research training programs like UT Austin, the research is fundamental. And what you want to do is marshal as much research experience that you can talk about as possible. If you've come from a research focused undergraduate program, maybe you've worked in a lab or done an honors thesis on research, use that. Be really specific about the experiences you had that demonstrate your interest in and your motivation to continue working in research, and that you know what you're getting into. If you come from a school that doesn't have as much research training, do what you can to get as much research training as possible. Even if it's in a non-psychology area, it can still demonstrate habits of thought of a researcher, and it can still demonstrate the motivation to be engaged in research. One of the reasons to take a gap year or two might be that you don't have research experience and you'd like to try to get that experience. It'll mean more legwork to try to get the position, because the deficit in terms of applying to the PhD program is also a deficit in applying to a research lab. But if you could get a hit, that would make all the difference in the world, and you would then be up there to compete with somebody from the best of research programs. The other way to make yourself stand out, Dan Gilbert used to say that graduate programs want to know 3 things about you. And I guarantee you, you don't have to write these down. They're simple. The first one is that you're motivated. The second is that you're smart. And the third is that you're motivated. The point is, enthusiasm means everything, and you want that to drip from your application, that this is your goal, this is your commitment, and you're willing to expend the time, the effort, the blood and tears to make it happen. Mentors are fundamental. What almost all research training programs are like for the PhD is working in a lab under the guidance of a mentor. And when Anna was talking before about how you choose a program, what she was really saying between the lines is you find a mentor first, and then you sort of make sure that the school works well for you as well. And because the mentor is so central, the very first thing you need to do that can't be skipped is to write potential mentors and ask them if they're taking a graduate student at the point that you want to apply. Because if they're not, and you apply to them, your application is going to at best get handed down to somebody else after they already have a set of applicants that speak to their interests. So write mentors first. Letters of recommendation are important. The more they can speak to your research experience, the better. If it's in psychology, ideal. If it's not in psychology, then get that to work for you. Almost all of these letters need to be from academics. They can't be from, your rabbi or your minister or the family banker, the kind of, letter that might work for a job. You need somebody that speaks to your academic competencies and your motivation to succeed in a research career. And the more you can get other people to speak for you, the more you get your best foot forward. So for those of you who have strong records, when you give the materials to a letter writer, make sure they know research experiences you've had outside of, for example, their lab or their teaching experience with you, because then they can address the issue of research in their letter, and you can reinforce it in your statement of purpose. In terms of the statement of purpose, probably the most important thing is that it's not a biographical statement of sort of your life and who you are. It's really an aspirational letter about your interest in motivation and aspirations for a particular program. And what you're really doing is marshaling a record of what your experiences are that demonstrate the skills that you bring, the depth of interest and commitment that you have that will make a program feel like you're a good bet for them. And letters or statements of purpose are hard to do. They're like writing a term paper in a hard course. They take many drafts, and you need to get advice from other people. Show them to professors who you have had courses with or who you work with in a lab. Show them to graduate students or TAs at your university. And with repeated work, it'll become a strong statement, not about so much who you are as a person as what you offer to a PhD program in terms of the enthusiasm, energy, and experience that you bring.
Awesome. That was just an incredible response to that. Yeah, one thing I just want to touch for just a second is like there are so many professors I found, especially at UT. I think Francis and David Schneer have really fostered some really like caring professors who like genuinely want you to succeed. And so I want to be able to get to some of these questions and then maybe open the floor a little bit. And so, Josh, actually, I'd like you to start off with this next question. So does it matter what kind of undergraduate institution I went to? If I want to go on to my PhD, does it help if I went to like UT undergrad and then applied to UT for a PhD? Can non-psychology majors apply to a PhD in psychology?
Yeah, I can make a stab at that, and I'll do it in two different ways. One is by very quick analogy. I remember going to a session like this where I was an observer, and it was handled in a way that the PhD program seemed so daunting that I watched the audience grow less and less enthusiastic. And I realized that, my God, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. So our job here is to get you to feel like you are a worthy candidate. And that means you have to work with us. So you have to believe in yourself. So your challenge as you get into this process is never, ever to rule yourself out. Always rule yourself in. So I would say take everything from your experience and give it the best, most positive spin that you can. So if, for example, you come from a school that's maybe a smaller non-research program, then the fact that you're interested in research demonstrates how you're different, how you're unique, how you learned something that went beyond what your school taught you. I would develop that. How is it that you got turned on to research and excited? What are one or two ways that even in the school you came from, you made that experience work for you? But the bottom line is no, that's not a deficit, and you can apply from any kind of background as long as you have that motivation, smart motivation. I guess maybe the second point was just to reinforce. I kind of slipped from the analogy of vote yourself in and not out to some of the things that you need to do. So the simple answer is don't rule yourself out no matter what your background. If you're not sure what your strengths are, get someone to help you. There are always people who would like to help you do well. Find somebody who can be a supporter, and you'll be surprised how they could take your story and give it a more positive spin. Okay. Does that help, Anna?
No, that's perfect. And just quickly, oh, sorry.
If I just may say one thing, coming from somebody who's still having a very hard time asking help to others, and it's something that I think you guys just need to get used to, and basically allow yourself to be vulnerable and basically get feedback, critical feedback from people. I wish I would have done this sooner. So whether it's your personal statement or anything, even your resume, there will always be people around you who will be willing to help you and guide you through this. And what's the worst thing that can happen? They will just say, no, I don't have time to do this, right? And that's not the end of the world. And I am speaking from somebody who still has a hard time doing this. You think by now I should be used to this. And I know what it feels like to be a young person, just trying to navigate things without having any idea what I'm doing. So, just feel free to do that, because there will always be people willing to read your statements and your resume. So anyway, I'll stop.
No, thank you so much, Joanne. Yeah, I want to get on to one of our last questions that Caitlin's going to start on answering, but just to add to that, there are people in our program who have undergrad degrees in film or journalism or education. Getting this level of degree, it's not about being a perfect track, psychology. It's about being someone who's interested in studying psychology at an advanced level. It's the passion, and so one of these really important questions that I definitely want to spend some time on is, so we kind of talked about that you need research experience to apply to a PhD, but what if you missed out on research opportunities because of COVID-19? So how do you think this will affect applications? And another good question to add to that is do I need research experience in the same field that you want to study in your graduate degree as in your undergraduate degree? Yeah, Caitlin, if you want to start addressing that question.
Yeah. So the bottom line is that you need research experience, and I am a PI that will look for that in applications, because it's through research experience, you gain some really critical skills that then in graduate school you can build upon. So hands down, you need the research experience. Now, COVID-19 definitely threw a wrench in everyone's lives, and so that makes it a little bit more difficult. So there are things that you can do, and I think it's worth taking the time now to think about how you want to approach it. There at UT and other places, they do offer virtual research experiences, and so you can and here at UT and other universities, they have like summer research internships or programs, and some of them are virtual. And next year they'll probably be back in person. So those are things to think about in your next year. If you still have another year, you can look into other research experience. But if you're applying now and you haven't had a lot of research experience, I would take a moment and think about what that means, and try to think about maybe taking another year, or some amount of time to gain that research experience. I can't emphasize that enough. So that's the overall statement is you need it, but there are ways in which you can try to engage in it with COVID in the current situation. And if you have gone through virtual rotations, I think that is more than sufficient. And what you do, and like Josh was alluding to, you highlight those in your application. And we've all been touched by COVID in some way. So that's not going to be looked upon as a weakness that you weren't in a lab, hands-on, but that you've gone through the research experience. So that's the kind of the end all be all for that statement. And what was the second question? I lost my train of thought. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Working memory is a fickle thing. It was, does your research experience, like in undergrad or before grad school, need to match what you want to do in graduate school?
I don't think so at all. So when I was when I was an undergrad, so I actually went right from undergrad into graduate school. So, but during that, I spent my summers engaged in different research experiences. And one of them was working with humans in a lab that was interested in understanding mimicry in humans. And I eventually got a publication out of it. It was a great experience, and I could talk about that in my application. That experience told me I did not want to work with humans, and I did not want to focus on that research experience. And I didn't. I studied something completely different. But that just goes to show that you don't have to study the same thing, or even focus on the same kind of thing. But during all kind of research experiences, you gain critical thinking skills, how to digest information, how to communicate scientific information effectively. And all of those things, I just listed three, translate across multiple aspects or domains of research. So I don't think you have to be tied in and committed, as an undergrad, and that's where you want to go. If it is, that's great. But it's all about kind of being able to draw on that experience and the skills that you've gained.
Yeah. Josh, if you want to ask that, and I'll wrap up too.
I'd like mostly to reinforce, Anna, what you and Caitlin, what you said, that these points about the importance of research, of doing whatever you can. In the case of COVID, emphasizing that despite the obstacle of COVID, you did A and B, or A, B, and C, and it demonstrates that commitment and enthusiasm. I want to reinforce that, but I also want to point out something that it's hard not to emphasize. It's hard to underemphasize, because it's a misconception I think a lot of students have, and it's easy to think that what we're talking about with research is the non-clinical side of psychology. And when you get to clinical, it's different. Essentially, for a program like UT Austin and the other schools that are comparable to UT, that distinction is not true. So when a mentor in a clinical lab looks at your application, what they're looking for is research, research, research. In fact, when you write your statement of purpose, 2 rules of thumb that I would say are fundamental. One is don't emphasize your interest in working with people. It's almost sad because I know all of you are good people. You care about others. You'd like to make a difference in the world. That's not what they want to hear about. They want to hear about the research, and you shoot yourself in both feet if you emphasize your clinical ear, your clinical competencies, your care for people, that you're somebody that everybody likes to talk to. The second thing is don't make your application negative. So a lot of people will say, my mother was a schizophrenic, my father was an alcoholic. I'd say don't do that. Negatives usually never help. The first pass in most good labs is not to identify students who you really want to work with, but to see if there are some who maybe you could remove from the pile to make the remaining pile more manageable. So anything negative out of context could do you enormous harm. And remember, just in a practical world, if you apply to a lab with a genetic focus and you emphasize genetically related disorders in your family, what trickles into the back of somebody's mind, gee, is this something you're coping with too? And if you apply to a nurturance, a family context kind of lab, less common these days, but it's the same problem anyway. So you grew up in a family that had these problems. I would say always emphasize positives. Maybe on an interview, you could, where you have more context, you can refine and clarify if there's any misconception. You could bring up that texture and that depth that makes you the person that you are. But I would say in a statement of purpose that's being looked at fairly quickly, to try not to put anything negative in. Try to always be positive about yourself.
Yeah, and I would, the research statements, they're not that long. So they may seem long when you're sitting down trying to write them, but they're not that long. And so you really want to emphasize the skills and your motivation, like Josh was saying, and not any of this other fluff. And I hate to call it fluff because there are, of course, maybe, serious issues that you may be dealing with, or that may have motivated you, but kind of showing the reasons why you want to go and the research experience. I mean, as someone who's gone through applications, those are the things that I'm looking for, and if they feel genuine. So I definitely agree with what Josh had to say.
Yeah, I'd just like to build on that. As someone who grades papers as part of my work as a TA, I don't sit there and read every sentence you write for your essays. I'm looking for key points. Did you address the facts? And your personal statements and your research statements are a lot like that. They just want to see, are you checking the boxes? You're interested in research. You did the thing. Okay, yeah. And there's so much opportunity and time to be able to express yourself later. Those things that make you a unique, beautiful person who's going to contribute amazing things to science. And so it's not saying that those personal effects aren't important, but it's like when you think about the aspect of someone reviewing 60, 100, several hundred applications for their one lab, you want to make sure, and that's what makes you stand out in your application, is are you checking the boxes? Are you making it easy to understand why you want to apply? I'd also like to touch on the base of research in undergrad. I was in 6 different labs at LSU because I just wanted to try everything. And I studied memory, I studied health, I did MRI, I just studied a bunch of stuff. And then when I went to my master's, I studied sleep and EEG. I don't do either of those things now. I study how babies cry and how we can help them to chill out. And so, but I remember that question in my interview that was okay, I see you have a lot of varied research experience. And the thing that I think really helped my chances was I was able to take bits and pieces of those varied experiences. I would say, this is how I built a foundation to become a good researcher. I learned a lot of different ways. I've become adaptive. I'm able to integrate a lot of different techniques. And then it was like, well, are you okay with studying the same thing for 5 years now? And it's like, yeah. And the thing is, like, I'm not going to do the same project for 5 years, but I'm going to be studying the same subject matter, the same kind of population, and having that conversation with yourself, like, okay, am I ready to like become an expert in this thing? Even then, I've had professors who told me, like, I did this in my PhD, and then once I finished, I found my own research interest. It's about building skills. You become an expert at answering questions. That's what an academic and a researcher is. And so don't feel like you're getting yourself stuck into like one question, one niche for the rest of your life. You're becoming an expert in learning and teaching. And I think that really is kind of like liberating to think of.
Can I add on one,
please?
To your point? Yeah. So I think get research experience as you can, but I would also caution in spreading yourself too thin and like being, to me, that's crazy that you're in 6 labs. And to me, that would say, can you focus? Are you able to focus on 1 or 2 different things? And what I want my students to do is to be committed and to their research and really begin to evolve their thinking in depth about what my lab and what our research is focused on. So to me, you, even if you have done this, I'm speaking to everyone, that's great, but the way you craft it in a personal statement, you need to be careful so you don't give the impression that you're doing all of these different things, because what that would say to me is, can this person focus for 5 to 6 years? Can they really focus and think about these things deeply and stay committed to the work? So that's one thing to think about with that approach. You've obviously done really well, so that's great, but it's just something to keep in mind.
No, that was a criticism I got. It was like, are you focused? Like, can you focus? And that's why it's like, you have to think outside of that box of like, well, how do I express that, like, yes, I can focus. And this is the time where I'd like to do it. And so that can come in many different formats. But that was definitely a critique I got during my interviews. It's like, okay, are you going to do this for 5 years? Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. So we're running pretty low on time, but I just want to, any last minute questions, if people want to unmute themselves, if you want to drop them in the chat real quick.
Can I add something that's just in general?
Please,
I think this is like one of the most important things, and Josh mentioned this earlier, but it's really critical. And I think it's, when you're doing your research on the programs at this stage, to contact the mentors ahead of time. And I will say that because in my experience, when I've had multiple conversations with applicants up until when applications are submitted, and when I see those applications, I remember them, and they, just by, because of experience, those stick out, and I have already begun to build somewhat of a relationship. So it seems like it's far in advance, but reach out. I'm always happy to converse over email or Zoom or whatever, but do it ahead of time, because it really does make a difference when you're getting hundreds of applications. And maybe through these conversations, like I'm never going to commit to anyone, but I have in my mind said, okay, I am taking a student and this person seems like a really great fit. And so I will maybe, subconsciously already kind of build that person into where I see my research program going. And if I get other applicants that haven't really reached out to me, I will pay less attention to them. That's just kind of how it goes. So that is like, if I could give a piece of advice, that is what I would do starting now.
And I'd like to make two real quick points, and they have to do with helping you to vote yourself in and not out of this process of reaching for the kind of the fullest and the best person you can be. And let me think of one hypothetical person who maybe looks at our discussion today and thinks this sounds too hard. This is so much work, so much effort, so much preparation. Is it worth it? Yes, in all capital letters. What you're laying is the foundation for a life, for who you will be, for when you look back on your contribution, what it was, and it's worth the effort. And the second thing is maybe speaking to somebody who feels like when they get into a program, they're not going to be as good as the other people there. And, you know, I'll do all this work and I'll get there and then I won't feel the confidence that I should. Please know that what graduate school is about is growth. It's all about development. And a good lab gives you the structure for growth. You start out as somebody helping a mentor do their research, and you grow into somebody who slowly begins to frame your own research questions and to make your own mark in science. But that's a process that we all go through, and it's worth the effort.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I just love this panel. And I'd like to say, I never thought I could be a scientist. I failed a lot of math classes and I just never thought I'd be any good at it. And I like did good on one stats test and I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And then I just kept trying and doing some failure and trying again and doing some failure and trying again. Science is for everyone. I want to be a scientist because I want to make it more accessible. I'm passionate about it. Super huge nerd. I love the look in people's eyes and they're like, oh, that's what that means. And I'm like, yeah. If you want to be a scientist, you can be a scientist. Science needs people who love science, you know? And there's a lot of people who, you know, just get like locked in and it's all about funding and things like that. And yeah, that totally happens. And there are systematic issues in academia for sure. But I really think that good people coming into the field, making a difference, taking the time, is never not going to be worth it. And find your allies, find your people, and just like do good science, my friends. We need you. And I'm just so happy everyone was here today. I really hope you got stuff out of it. Please check the resource guide. Send me emails. I love talking about this stuff. And yeah, thank you so much. Joanne, do you want to say anything before we close out?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording for now.